Well, it took a while, but after a little bit of a wait, we managed to catch a trolley heading back in the other direction, so heading back toward Union Square, and that means that I finally get a chance to interview my final guest, and that is Christopher Elisan, Director of Threat Intelligence at Flashpoint. Christopher, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, while we were sitting around waiting for a trolley, we were basically looking out into the ocean and saw Alcatraz out there, and Alcatraz, of course, makes me think of crime, and crime makes me think of cybercrime. So we're going to talk about cybercrime today, specifically in the form of ransomware. Christopher, I know you actually did a presentation on ransomware earlier today, specifically on GandCrab, and interestingly enough, you told me that you made a comparison between GandCrab and Bohemian Rhapsody, of all things. So I'm really curious to hear how you made that connection, and maybe you could just talk a little bit about GandCrab and what's made it a nuisance. I know it appeared, kind of emerged early in 2018, and it was one of the preeminent ransomwares and most notorious ones of the last year. So talk a little bit about what made it a nuisance and explain that connection to Bohemian Rhapsody for me.
Yeah, so when I started my talk, there were lots of people that were coming in, and I was thinking, it reminded me of people wanting to watch Bohemian Rhapsody. So I introduced GandCrab in a way. It's just like Queen. They have awesome songs, but they don't have any way of actually distributing it. So they had to talk to different record labels, so they'll have the album package and distribute it. Same with GandCrab. The threat actors, they have this new ransomware. They think it's one of the best ransomware that has been created. So what they did in January of 2018 is that they posted an ad in the deep dark web saying, you know what, we have this ransomware. If you have access to spam bots, or you have access to technologies that would spread our ransomware, whatever we earn, you get 60%. And if it's really, really successful, we can bump it up to 70%. So that's how I made the connection between GandCrab and Bohemian Rhapsody.
So there are a number of unique attributes about GandCrab that have gotten the security community's attention. For example, its use of Dash is something which it made it unique. Talk a little bit about some of the interesting points about GandCrab, which kind of separates it from the rest of its ransomware peers, and what have you observed about it in the course of your research?
Yeah, so from what I see, GandCrab is the first one that used Dash cryptocurrency when collecting ransomware. When collecting ransom. They're still using a Bitcoin, but the thing about Bitcoin is it's not as private and anonymous, so they could still track the transactions. But with Dash, it solves that problem for them. Everything is private, everything is anonymous, which is how they like it.
Anything else strike you as particularly unique or interesting about GandCrab?
Yeah, so one thing unique about it is how it uses the run once key for persistence. So most ransomware, or even most malware, they would use the run key. But for GandCrab, they use the run once key. So a run once key is that it gets executed by the operating system during boot up, and then it gets deleted. So it uses that because, number one, every time GandCrab is executed, it actually creates a new polymorphic version of itself. So it's just like every time you reboot the system, it would take on a new form, harder for you to detect it in the system. So that's one thing that's really, really interesting about GandCrab. And of course, the use of Dash when it comes to ransom payment.
Now, of course, that's not the only ransomware that's been making news over the last few months. Really late in 2018, there was the fairly notorious Ryuk ransomware attack that affected the operations and disrupted the operations of various publishing companies and newspapers. So give me us a little bit of a compare and contrast between that and GandCrab. How is Ryuk different?
So GandCrab is more of an opportunistic attack. It's like a spray and pray attack. And when you get victimized, the way for you to communicate with the threat actors is that it'll give you an onion, a Tor link, and you go to that link, it'll tell you how much time you have left, or if you don't pay the ransom in 2 days, it'll double. So most of the communication between the victims and the threat actor is done through that website. With Ryuk, it's more of a targeted attack. So they actually have different builds for different victims, and the ransom note is actually specific to that victim. So, for example, dear victim X, we encrypted all your files. You have to pay us ransom. And the way they communicate with the victims, instead of using a Tor site, they would give you an email address. Like, if you want us to decrypt your file, contact us in this email address. So number one, it keeps it much more discreet compared to a GandCrab, and the ransom varies depending on how big the company is that they victimized, which makes it that much more scarier than a GandCrab.
And also at Flashpoint, you conduct a lot of dark web research. What is maybe the strangest or most unusual thing that you've come across in the course of researching and tracking various dark web marketplaces? Tell me maybe some of the oddest things you've come across.
Yeah. So aside from the funny memes,
Yes.
so there's this whole discussion between. So we also monitor terror groups, right? So we see it in the deep dark web, the way they communicate. So there's this whole thing about their main headquarters telling one of their subsidiaries in one of the countries that is being occupied by that terrorist group that the Earth is not flat, it's spherical, something like that. So it's funny following that back and forth between them. So I find it really, really hilarious.
Yeah, so basically what went on was you had a full-on flat earther debate, flat earth versus round earth debate
Yep.
going back and forth between different members of the dark web community.
Yep. So that's one of my favorites when it comes to funny stuff in the deep dark web.
Yeah, that's definitely an unusual one, but interesting that they decided to have a whole scientific debate in the middle of trying to sell illegal data or ransom or whatever.
Exactly.
All right, well, listen, thanks very much, Christopher. I appreciate it. I'm so glad you could join us.
No, thank you for having me, and I really enjoy it. And it's good that we finally caught a cable car on the way back.
You had the whole one to yourself, the whole ride to yourself. So that's it. Save the best for last, right?
Exactly.
But I do want to thank all the rest of my guests too, and I think this was a terrific trolley talk. And we'll see you again at next year's RSA.